the story we will be telling tonight has been around for quite some time, actually. It initially only started as a story that people told each other around, fires, gatherings, whatever. But as all great stories do, it got written down. And just like all great stories that get written down, there's 1,000 different editions of it. There's 1,000 different interpretations, 1,000 different translations of it. So for any of my friends, which I did have like 4 or 5 former band members come up to me last night and say, hey, I was studying this in classical mythology. You guys missed this thing. I was like, did you not hear the announcement? So if you are listening to the story and you happen to notice that some things have been edited and left out, as is on purpose. It's literally 20 years of storytelling in one musical piece. So we condensed it as much as we could. So just be aware of that. If you like Disney movies or perhaps Epic the Musical, that's kind of the vibe we're going for. So that said, the person who helped kind of condense this, edit it, and all these things through the power of Red Bull and sweet treats, Zoe Wiggs was able to get this ADHD riddled brain to actually speak words and tell her exactly what should be said and when. So let's hear it for Zoe Wiggs. All right, so people I forgot yesterday, you may notice at some point in the tune that there's some cool, colorful things on stage. Our wonderful friend Jillian Hardiman provided us with all of these cool fire effects. So Jillian, you're looking up, go ahead and stand up. Let's say important person, Ms. Karen Burns, who is back here on piano and is the official ADHD wrangler of the Sparkman band. So let's hear it from Ms. Burns. And a real quick special one, Shelby Hoover, thank you so much for letting us use your flute. We had a small emergency before while we were warming up, so let's get for Shelby somewhere up here. Alright, now for the favorite part of the night, I'm going to stop talking to a microphone and we're going to pass it over to the incomparable Mr. Gilreath, who will be our narrator.
Our program is based off of 2 epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, by the Greek philosopher Homer. It follows the 20-year journey of a Greek hero, Odysseus, as he attempts to get home following the Trojan War. Throughout the story, Odysseus is driven by the overwhelming need to retake his throne on the island of Ithaca in order to see his wife, Penelope, and his son, Telemachus, once again. This performance of Robert W. Smith's Symphony No. 2 will be presented without pause, so please hold your applause until the end. The piece is in 4 movements. We will begin at the end of the Iliad in the days of the 10-year Trojan War. Then we will face the wrath of Poseidon, and after escaping the Isle of Calypso, we will finally return to Ithaca. Ladies and gentlemen, the Odyssey. Our story begins not with Odysseus, but Paris, the youngest prince of Troy. Zeus, god king of thunder and lightning, tasked Paris to bestow a golden apple bearing the inscription, "To the most beautiful," to one of 3 goddesses, all of whom promised Paris gifts of his favor. Athena offered him wisdom and skill in battle. Hera offered him a throne that would make him the king of Europe. Aphrodite offered him the love of the world's most beautiful woman, Helen of Sparta, wife of King Menelaus. Paris chose Aphrodite, and upon taking fair Helen's hand, he sparked a war with the mighty Greeks that would rage for 10 years. Menelaus called upon all of the Greek kings he had alliances with to come to his aid. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, was one of the many that were called upon and set sail to join the war efforts. Odysseus thought of his wife, Penelope, and son, Telemachus, back home at Ithaca. As soon as he approached the shores of the Greek encampment, he kept their faces in his mind and heart, vowing to return to them by any means. Odysseus called upon the gods to aid him in his journey, and for their guidance in the upcoming battle. With the shores in sight, he resolved to turn the tides of the war in the Greeks' favor by any means necessary. Odysseus and his men immediately joined the fray. The Greeks and Trojans were evenly matched in skill and numbers to start, which turned the war into a grueling stalemate for the next 9 years. Themselves to be at a disadvantage that they simply could not overcome in the battles. Being so far from home, they were unable to replenish their supplies and numbers with the same ease as the Trojans. They also had to contend with the nearly impenetrable walls surrounding the city of Troy. Faced with this, King Menelaus began to debate his options: continue fighting, knowing that he and his army were likely never going to make any headway over the Trojans, or retreat and hope that they would not be hunted down. Odysseus proposed an idea: one last-ditch effort to win. The Greeks would present the Trojans with a giant wooden horse as a peace offering, hoping to appeal to the Trojan customs honoring the creatures and be granted a safe retreat. What the Trojans didn't know when they accepted the offering was that the horse was hollow and filled with Greek soldiers. Keeping quiet under the sound of groaning wheels, Odysseus and the others were ushered past the city walls and sat in wait for nightfall. Once they were certain the city was asleep, the Greeks snuck out of the horse, hid through a hidden door, and opened the gates for their brothers at arms. were able to begin setting fire to the city before they were discovered by the Trojan soldiers. The sounds of battle began to ring out once again, but with their city ablaze, the Trojans saw that the war was quickly turning in favor of the Greeks. Eradicated, the city of Troy burned to the ground. Menelaus and Helen were reunited, and the Greeks were able to finally celebrate the end of the long war. Reboarding their ships, Odysseus and his men began their long journey home to Ithaca. In search of a way to feed his men once their supplies dwindled, Odysseus directed his fleet to a nearby island and discovered a cave full of sheep. Odysseus instructed his men to eat their fill and was making plans on how to preserve any of the uneaten meat for the remaining leg of their journey when the flock's shepherd appeared. A massive cyclops, 10 times the size of the largest Greek soldier, trapped Odysseus and his men in the cave, blocking their exit with a massive stone, and upon realizing his precious sheep had been slaughtered, the one-eyed giant began to rampage, demanding to know who had committed this heinous act. Clever Odysseus responded and told the creature that his name was Nobody, and attempted to persuade the Cyclops to let them go. Unconvinced by Odysseus' bargaining, the Cyclops began killing the Greeks easily with a single swing of its massive club. Ever the strategist, Odysseus issued the command to his men to incapacitate the Cyclops, for if they killed the creature, they would be trapped in the still-sealed cave. Once the Cyclops was downed, the Greeks sharpened the end of its club to a point and stabbed it into the eye of the creature. While the Cyclops bellowed in pain that nobody was hurting it, the Greeks hid by clinging to the bellies of the remaining sheep. The Cyclops moved the massive stone blocking the entrance to the cave, hoping its brethren would come to its aid, but received no response. After all, nobody was hurting it. The sheep left the cave with the Greeks clinging to them, and the mostly blinded Cyclops could not see its attackers making their escape. Once safely aboard their ships, Odysseus commanded his men to set sail once again for Ithaca. Feeling proud of his achievement, Odysseus had to call out to the Cyclops and gloat before his men were out of earshot. He told the creature that his name was actually Odysseus, king of Ithaca, and thanked the Cyclops for filling his men's bellies before the final leg of their journey home. The Cyclops, enraged, prayed for its father, Poseidon, god of the seas, to never let Odysseus make it home. Answering its prayer, massive storms began to rampage and block the Greeks' way home. The storms took a heavy toll on the Greek numbers, and Odysseus began to wonder if he would ever get to see his wife Penelope and son Telemachus ever again. The winds blew the remaining Greek ships onto an island inhabited by a powerful witch by the name of Circe. She told Odysseus that in order to make it home to Ithaca, he would have to sail through the most treacherous parts of the ocean, where even Poseidon himself would never dare to venture, in order to avoid the gods' wrathful storms and waves. The path would take Odysseus and his crew on a narrow strait between two fearsome creatures. On one side, a six-headed beast that would require sacrifices of Odysseus' men in order to safely pass, and on the other, a massive creature that would have created enormous whirlpools leading directly to its hungry jaws. Circe also warned Odysseus that his path towards these creatures would be blocked by sirens, creatures with beautiful singing voices that would lure sailors to their doom. She gave Odysseus wax to plug his and his crew's ears, but warned him that they would still be tempted by even the slightest sound of the alluring melodies. Once safely past the sirens, Odysseus and his men had to survive the journey between the two fearsome creatures Circe described. They would have to sail carefully because if they strayed off the path even slightly, they could be consumed by the monsters or be blown back into Poseidon's storms. Odysseus had not told his crew about the plan to sacrifice some of them for safe passage, so when they reached the six-headed monster, his men panicked. The Greeks attempted to avoid their hungry mouths, but in doing so, careened directly into the massive whirlpool leading to the other creature's snapping jaws. Greeks faced more heavy losses than the sacrifices Circe warned Odysseus about. While trying to avoid the monsters himself, Odysseus abandoned his ship and attempted to navigate the churning waters in a small raft. Poseidon, now aware of his schemes, once again blew Odysseus off course, directly onto the isle of the goddess Calypso. Time worked differently on the island. Months could pass in the blink of an eye, while hours in the day would drag. For Odysseus, any time at all spent stationary on the island was maddening. Despite his attempts to leave, the tide would never let his raft pass through, for the island was cursed to trap whoever inhabited it. Calypso tried to convince Odysseus that his fate was not doomed, and that he could forget Ithaca, forget Telemachus, and forget Penelope, and build a life with her on the island instead. Odysseus refused her and mourned the life he could have had he not been so foolish with the Cyclops. After 7 long years, most of the gods on Olympus took pity on Odysseus and decided to lift the island's curse long enough to allow him to leave. Odysseus prepared a new raft with the materials he found on the accursed island and bid the immortal Calypso farewell. There was, however, one god who protested this decision. Poseidon, still bitter about the slight against the Cyclops and the fact that Odysseus had survived his onslaught of storms and waves, decided to make his final stand against the king. Odysseus arrived on Ithaca's shores. While approaching his home, his excitement to see his family once more was ruined when he realized his courts were overrun by suitors seeking to take his throne and his wife's hand in marriage. Unbeknownst to Odysseus, the gods had given Penelope a premonition that her husband would soon be returning. With that in mind, she devised a plan to buy Odysseus as much time as she could. She issued a challenge. The suitor that could string her husband's bow and use it to shoot an arrow through the holes in 12 axes would be given the throne, and preparations for their marriage would begin immediately. The suitors leapt into action, each one more anxious than the last for their turn to attempt the trial laid before them. As the day wore on, the suitors grew frustrated. None were able to string the incredible weapon, much less attempt to shoot it with the precision being asked of them. Before they could act on their frustrations, a man dressed in rags stepped out of the crowd and asked to see the bow. Laughing at them, the seemingly feeble old man, the suitors presented him the weapon. Before their eyes, the true king of Ithaca strung his bow. With the ease of someone half his age, Odysseus took aim at the axes, let loose the arrow, and watched as it sailed through the holes before burying itself in the chest of one of the treacherous suitors. Without saying a word, Odysseus turned and took aim at another suitor in the crowd, intending to eradicate every one of them for terrorizing his wife and son for 20 years. Telemachus, recognizing the old man now as his father, joined Odysseus at his side. After quickly giving his father a sword, the good duo began to slowly cut through the crowd without mercy as chaos broke out amongst the suitors. With the suitors defeated, Odysseus embraced Penelope and finally retook his throne as the true king of Ithaca. So much, and we will transition